Hello and welcome to this video on how trees heal. This is a concept that is directly applicable to bonsai, as we regularly prune and cut bonsai to cultivate a given shape, style, leaf size, ramification, and more. Knowing how a tree heals is important to the longevity and health of your bonsai. We prune trees back whether as bonsai or out of a pot. This means we are regularly damaging the tree and it has to heal. This is done by cutting branches, but also the use of concave cutters, which is an important distinction in the way and needs of healing bonsai. We all understand and know the general concept that trees grow in concentric rings every growing season. These layers add up over time. That is the simple version, and things get a little more complicated. During each growing period, the trees will develop their trunks and branches also in an outwards way. This is done in layers, those consecutive rings. These consecutive rings occur by cells dividing. The cells divide in a particular way, that is, they form a cone and they only ever point outwards. The cells then stack on top of each other. This is like a pile of triangles, where the next triangle's bottom is balanced on the pointy top of the first triangle. With this in mind, you can begin to see how it might be difficult for a tree to heal. This is one reason why wounds in a tree that penetrate the bark can be more significant or less significant depending on how much damage they do. The damage needs to get to the cambium. The cambium is the live, living layer of the tree. It's the layer of the tree where there's vascular tissue which allows movement of water and nutrients. What's worth noting is that if less than 25% of the tree trunk has been damaged, the tree will live, but more than that and you get a substantive drop-off in the probability of a tree surviving. When we're looking at the damage itself, the tree will respond in one of two ways, and often both at different times. The first of these is compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is where the tree attempts to isolate the damaged area. Compartmentalization normally begins in the collar. That's the part of the tree where the branch comes out of the trunk. The collar is important because it contains very specialized cells. These special cells are something known as the branch defense zone. When these are activated, they begin growth of woundwood. Woundwood is what begins sealing in and covering over the damaged site. This phenomenon is important when we talk about bonsai, and particularly the use of concave cutters. Most bonsai will have the branch collar cut right back to the trunk and then recessed. This process removes the collar consequently. Doing so will prevent the growth of woundwood around the cut site. It does, however, allow the trunk to finish flush. This is the first of the two processes, the physical boundary. That is a physical way to keep pathogens out and allow the tree to heal. The second is sometimes called the reaction zone. This is a chemical change in the tree. Primarily, it's intended to do one simple thing: make the site as inhospitable to pathogens as possible. To provide a little more information on how these two processes work together, we should think of them in a manner similar but not the same to scarring in a human. When the barrier zone or the compartmentalization occurs, it's similar to a scab or scar tissue. This allows it to callus, and then the wood begins to grow inwards and grow over the wounded site. Eventually that callus should cover everything. Once it's achieved that, it begins to grow outwards again. The process of creating this compartmentalization involves the interruption to the cambium. This is similar to how we would work with air layers. The reason why it begins to work here is that it does not want pathogens moving up through the cambium, much like the human body does not want infection moving through the blood supply. Having slowed down the movement, it begins to form a impediment to movement within and around the damaged area. These are normally done in a particular way, and it's done from the inside to the outside of the wound. After this, a special type of cell called ray cells form another barrier. This barrier's role is to prevent decay from moving around it. This also leads to some of those chemical reactions. The chemical reactions allow the prevention of pathogens from making home there. If they can't set up site, then they can't cause damage or death. The final barrier generated is the barrier wall. This is the final layer of compartmentalization, and this sits on the outside of the tree. This should also be closest to both the wound and new developing wood, and it's the final layer on the outside. This is where we begin to see that movement in and rolling over of the damaged wood. When we're looking at bonsai, there are different parts of the tree we'll prune: branches and the trunk. Depending on where we're cutting, we're going to see different effects. Sapwood is more likely to be able to recover and is resistant to decay, which means it doesn't need to be compartmentalized as much. This means pruning branches, especially towards the periphery of the tree, is less likely to result in any kind of scarring. We don't need to worry about the growth of the tree here anywhere near as much. It's the heartwood or hardwood that is more important when we're talking about compartmentalization. Because the flow of nutrition and water through the cambium is much slower, and the rate of growth here is significantly less, it's more likely to wind up being compartmentalized. The heartwood therefore is a more significant issue than the sapwood. When you're looking at what you're pruning on your tree, you might be considering whether or not to remove a branch closer to the trunk or further away. This is one thing that will guide your decision, just how much risk it places with either dieback or death of the tree. Based on this, we can see how bonsai tend to rely on compartmentalization and chemical healing signals over other methods when we're talking about the trunk, but primarily chemical healing when we're talking about the periphery. If you're interested, there's a lot of information and research about this, and there are a handful of researchers who have put a lot more time and effort into it than others. In short, when we cut into a bonsai, we see several particular phenomena. The first and simplest is that tree branches on the periphery are something we don't need to worry about anywhere near as much. Cutting into the trunk and the hardwood is more significant, and the way it heals is going to be much slower. This is one reason why, if you can avoid removing branches close to the trunk, it's a good idea to do so. On the other hand, sometimes form has to supersede function, and you need to remove them. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you might have below.